Countless small evolutionary changes have accumulated through the last 3.8 billion years, leading to today's great diversity of life. This figure shows us 4.6 billion years in 1 hour because we believe the Earth formed about 4.6 billion years ago. And you can see that it's just in the last fraction of a second in 1 hour that modern humans have evolved. Another question we might ask ourselves is, how do small mutations, even if numerous, actually produce a new species? Well, first, we need to explore what actually defines a species. In the 1700s, the scientist Linnaeus defined species based on their appearance. He also created a naming scheme for species, which is referred to as binomial nomenclature, in which every species has a genus name and a species name. Each species name combines the broader classification genus with this species. For example, humans are called Homo sapiens. More recently, the biological species concept defines species based on their potential to both interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Speciation, which is defined as the formation of new species, occurs when some individuals can no longer interbreed with the rest of the group. And we're going to explore many of the ways that speciation might occur on our planet today. Even though many of these butterflies look very similar, all of them are in fact distinct species that can no longer interbreed with the other ones. All right, here's your first question. The biological species concept cannot be applied to humans, plants, extinct organisms, or organisms that look alike. So you've got 4 choices. Please pause the lecture if you don't want to see the answer yet. The biological species concept cannot be applied to extinct organisms. When you're studying for the first exam, make certain that you understand how biological species concepts differ from the Linnaean definition of the term species. If the potential to interbreed is what defines a species, then we can say that reproductive isolation results in new species. First, let's talk about reproductive barriers that can cause speciation, and the first type is called a prezygotic reproductive barrier. Let's look at the root word. Pre means before, and zygotic refers to the zygote, which is when the sperm fuses with the egg, or we call that the fertilized egg. Therefore, prezygotic reproductive barriers always will prevent fertilization from occurring in the first place. And in this table from your textbook, you need to know the definitions of all of these types of prezygotic reproductive barriers. We have number 1, habitat isolation, number 2, temporal isolation, number 3, behavioral isolation, number 4, mechanical isolation, and number 5, gametic isolation. In addition, we also have post-zygotic reproductive barriers. These types of barriers reduce the fitness of offspring that are produced by members of 2 different species. Post-zygotic reproductive barriers therefore prevent the development of fertile offspring. And the 3 types that you must know for the exam include number 1, hybrid inviability, number 2, hybrid infertility, and number 3, hybrid breakdown. After you have reviewed the definitions of all of the pre- and post-zygotic barriers, you should be able to answer this question. Which of the following is an example of a post-zygotic reproductive barrier. Your first choice is a cross between a horse and a donkey produces an infertile mule. Your next choice is two types of fireflies lure mates with different flash patterns. Your next choice is bees pollinate one flowering plant species, hummingbirds pollinate another. And your final choice is pine sperm cannot fertilize redwood eggs. Pause the lecture if you don't want to see the answer yet. The answer is a cross between a horse and a donkey produces an infertile mule. This is the only example from this list that is a post-zygotic reproductive barrier. When you're studying for the exam, make certain that you understand how all of these reproductive barrier types ultimately may lead to speciation. Reproductive barriers arise in two ways, depending on the spatial patterns. The first spatial pattern is called allopatric speciation, and the second spatial pattern is called sympatric speciation. In allopatric speciation, a physical barrier separates our populations so they simply cannot interbreed. For example, a mountain range might separate two populations of these different types of flowers. With no gene transfer between the populations due to this physical barrier, each proceeds down its own evolutionary line. Eventually, genetic differences between the populations give rise to one or more of the reproductive barriers that we just learned about. For example, Galapagos tortoises diverged into several subspecies because they lived on different physical islands. In sympatric speciation, populations diverge while they are sharing a similar habitat. So in this example, sympatric equals same habitat. They live right alongside of each other, and yet they still diverge genetically. As an example from our textbook, we discuss fish that live in a small African lake. Each species of this fish specializes in a unique microenvironment. Therefore, over evolutionary time, this led to both reproductive isolation and ultimately speciation. Sympatric speciation also occurs when gametes unite to form polyploid offspring with more chromosomes than either parent. In plants, a common mechanism of sympatric speciation is polyploidy, which occurs when the number of sets of chromosomes increases. A polyploid plant is genetically distinct and cannot interbreed with the original species. And some of our crops that we often find in our world are products of this polyploid plant breeding. Produce such as strawberries, bananas, kiwis, and even cotton are all polyploid species. Here's our next question. About 3 million years ago, the waterway of Panama closed, forming a physical land bridge that connected North and South America. Snapping shrimp collected from water on one side look similar to those on the other side, and yet they can't interbreed. Therefore, what has occurred? Is it allopatric speciation or sympatric speciation? Pause the lecture if you don't want to hear the answer yet. There is no contact between populations, so therefore allopatric speciation has occurred. When you're studying for the exam, make certain you can distinguish between allopatric and sympatric speciation and provide examples of each. The fossil record supports two hypotheses about the pace of evolution. The first is gradualism, and the second is punctuated equilibrium. Gradualism suggests that evolution proceeds in small incremental changes over many generations. Punctuated equilibrium suggests that there are long periods of very little change that are interrupted by rapid bouts of change. Evolution might occur quickly when a key adaptation arises. For example, the first flowering plant species diversified very quickly because these flowers provided new options for reproduction and allowed for lots of genetic outcrossing, which allows us to get new combinations of alleles. Evolution might also occur quickly after a mass extinction. The surviving organisms exploit new resources in this changed environment. As you're studying for the exam, make certain you can describe the theories of both gradualism and punctuated equilibrium. Extinction marks the end of the line for any given species. Species that are extinct, therefore, by definition, means that all members have died. Most extinctions occur as part of the background extinction rate, which is the pace at which species go extinct due to gradually changing environments. However, the Earth has also witnessed 5 mass extinction events in the last 600 million years alone. During these mass extinction periods, many species went extinct in a relatively short period of time. Impact theory suggests that meteorites or comets might have caused some of these mass extinctions. The evidence is in the rocks. We can find layers of iridium in many layers of rock on our planet. And iridium is super rare on planet Earth, but it's very common in meteorites. Therefore, this suggests that a big space rock collided with our planet, caused a huge cloud of dust to rise up into the atmosphere, and then that dust fell back down to Earth, becoming part of the geological record. Recall that plate tectonics refers to the Earth's shifting land masses, and these plate tectonics dynamics might also explain mass extinction events. Scientists now believe that we are currently witnessing the start of a mass extinction event that is unlike anything we've seen on Earth in the last 65 million years. This is an alarming new finding that is supported by hundreds of scientific research articles. Therefore, we are currently experiencing a 6th mass extinction, and human activities must be changed. When you're studying for the exam, make certain you can distinguish between the background extinction rate and mass extinctions on our planet. Here's a challenge statement for you to consider as you're preparing for the exam. Suburban developments in woodland areas could accelerate the speciation of local wildlife. Do you agree or disagree with this statement, and why? Be sure to cite at least one piece of specific evidence to support your answer. The final part of this lecture is on how we classify life to figure out how organisms are related to each other. Biologists attempt to organize all species into a classification system that reflects the evolutionary history of those organisms. Taxonomy, you might recall, is the science of describing, naming, and classifying species. In our textbook, we learn all about the taxonomic hierarchy, in which we can organize species into progressively larger groups. Phylogenetics is the study of evolutionary relationships among species. Phylogenetic trees depict evolutionary relationships based upon descent from common ancestors. For example, our textbook provides this example for the placenta in specific types of animals. The placenta is a derived character that was not present in the common ancestor that placental mammals share with both marsupials and monotremes. So there's a lot of pieces to this statement that we need to break down. The platypus is a type of organism that we call a monotreme. They have mammary glands and hair, but they don't have a placenta. The kangaroo gives birth to live young, but it doesn't have a placenta. Only humans have a placenta that nourishes the young fetus in the uterus. A cladogram is a type of phylogenetic tree that shows how organisms are related to each other as represented by clades. A clade is defined as a group of organisms consisting of a common ancestor and all of the descendants of that common ancestor. Tracing taxa back to their common ancestor reveals evolutionary relatedness. And these taxa are simply groups of organisms that are seen by taxonomists as a unit on the tree of life. According to this cladogram, a bird is more closely related to a dinosaur than either is to a crocodile. And while this might seem weird to think that a bird is closely related to a dinosaur, scientists have known this for many years, based upon heart and skull characteristics, among others. Here's a funny comic or picture of a little bird that hopefully will make you laugh. However, science is always changing, and as new evidence is presented, it forces us to rewrite our textbooks. Fossils of a feathered creature from the Jurassic period was found recently in China, and its bones more closely resemble a tree-dwelling mammal than a ground-dwelling dinosaur. It is challenging the notion that all birds are derived from dinosaurs on the tree of life, which is how we present it in most of our textbooks